focus for my presentation will be on giving form to information. And I think we talk a lot about information, we talk a lot about analytics, a lot of the buzzwords we hear when we read The Economist, the New York Times, and all the various different publications. So I thought I'd go online and Google analytics. What is it? Because I tend to be in that category of individuals who kind of throws words around, and I thought it would probably make sense for me to look at what the word means and what its context is relative to the geospatial industry. And one of the key things I want to pull out of this definition from Google is information resulting from the systematic analysis of data or perhaps statistics. So it then comes back to, okay, analytics are done in order to derive information. And bringing it back to our world, we of course are very familiar with the term geographic information system or systems. But I want to focus on information. What is the information? Because I think many times, including myself, we get lost in the minutia associated with the technology. And we love the technology, of course, but we get lost in that technology and sort of miss the context of this information really is valuable and has to make sense for your traditional users, your farmer, your miner, your warfighter, your environmentalist, your engineer, etc. So it's really that information and what is information. I don't think information is what we read in an article in a newspaper, nor is information something we pull from a spreadsheet. That's all data, right? That's a collection of content that sort of comes from multiple sources. I don't think information is something we could see. I don't think information is something we could hear. I don't think information is something we can touch, okay? Information allows us to confidently make a selection or a decision from a set of ideal alternatives or options. That's what information it is, something that's communicated and allows us to take action. It doesn't have a form, okay? Information is about communicating a message to a user or to the subscriber or the listener of that message. And if we look at our industry, including myself, I was educated in geography, GIS, remote sensing. I studied all of those wonderful genres that we all know and love. We are the form gatherers. We are the formers. We are the ones that provide form to geographic information, okay? So our job is to provide form and then ultimately inform. How do we do that? Outside of this space, we typically write things down, we typically draw things, or we make maps. That's the form that we ultimately and primarily use to deliver information. And then, of course, with social media, with all of these wonderful new technologies we have in the space, there are many new ways of providing form to information. But oftentimes, we confuse information with the form it takes. Providing a map is not information. Providing a CAD drawing is not information. Okay, and I think we get lost in that, particularly when we now start aggregating and synthesizing the concepts associated with analytics, the ability to present the results of an analytical process in a way that makes sense. And I think there's two sides to the coin that we really need to understand and perhaps assess further or perhaps deeper. The first side of that coin, of course, is in our domain, the geoprocessing, the ability to harvest and ultimately pull together raster operators, vector operators, point cloud, photogrammetric operators, and ultimately synthesize these geospatial genres as analytical recipes that help us fuse multi-source content in order to deliver a derivative product. And I think the second side of that coin, and one that frankly we tend to forget about, and one that's frankly the most important, is communicating the results of a geoprocess so it makes sense, so it delivers a message, so it delivers information that can ultimately be understood and ultimately used to make a decision or ultimately used to act and make a difference. Hexagon's focus is not about building sensors, it's not about writing geospatial software, our focus is really about helping provide a platform or the ability to deliver information as a new form. But that requires the ability to communicate the results of these processes as a message that ultimately makes sense. We do a lot of business in South Africa, visiting some of these key customers who are farmers. They don't want a map. They don't want an image. They don't want an elevation data set in their tractor. They use colors and noise to tell them when to start fertilizing, when to start planting, when to start watering. They don't have maps, and if they do have a map, it's a local map and perhaps not one that we would subscribe to as being a map. Because the farmer has to be communicated to in a different way as opposed to, let's say, a GIS manager or a GIS professional. So we have to understand what it means to communicate the results of information as a message that allows that farmer to act or make a decision. Similarly, the urban planners, and I'll show you one example that we've worked with our partners in the UK around Milton Keynes. Urban planners don't know what the difference is between all these layers in a GIS or terrain models or this parcel or that parcel. They speak a different language, okay? And we have to be able to communicate information to that urban planner that makes sense so they can, in fact, do their jobs. One of my heroes, and I would strongly urge you, if you haven't already looked at some of these books, and I know some universities teach Tufte in graphical design. Tufte is my hero, okay? Because Tufte, Edward Tufte, through these two books, and he has several other books, he has the uncanny ability to take and synthesize information about things that we would never graphically represent. But he's learned how to communicate the results of that visualization so it makes sense. And in this day and age, with so many sources of content coming from space, from the air, from the ground, we're being inundated with social media feeds with all this content. We can't make sense of it because we don't know how to communicate this in a way that others can ultimately use this. Envisioning Information and Visual Explanations are two wonderful books that challenge you to think differently, challenge you to think about how you're going to communicate the results of a process or the results of data coming together. Charles Joseph Menard lived from 1781 to 1870, and Tufte talks about him in great detail. He was a French civil engineer, and many consider the first information designer. What did he do? He created this graphic, we could call it an infographic or a geographic, and I know that's a term Chris Tucker has used in the past. He's created this graphic that ultimately combines 6 different types of data in 2 dimensions. And this was back in 1869. Imagine what we can do with 3D, 4D, 5D, and all these other wonderful platforms that we have today. He was able to take, and this graphic, let me give you some context. This graphic shows Napoleon's disastrous efforts in Russia. Okay, if you've studied history and have studied what happened in Russia to Napoleon, he basically lost very, very dearly in Russia, given his campaign in the winter. And unfortunately, a lot of people died on the Russian side, on his side, and it was a very bad effort. But Menard took the number of troops, the distance traveled, the direction traveled, the weather, the location of those troops relative to a given time and date, okay? And basically fuse this with weather and other information with graphics to visualize on one fabric, in one form, very powerful information that historians and many people use to understand what happened as a result of this Russian disastrous campaign. Let's jump back from history into where we are today. And I've just selected, there's hundreds of formats. If you go to FME, if you go to any software product, we ourselves support 400 different formats from different vendors. I think if we take a step back and look at ourselves and look at our industry, we have given form. We have spent a lot of time providing form to geographic information, but I think that one of the challenges at Hexagon when we look at ourselves and ask ourselves is, are we containing or perhaps even constraining geographic information into these formats, into these databases, into images? The information, you can't touch, you can't see it. Okay, we have to think outside of these formats. We have to think outside of our traditional ways of constraining and providing form to this fabric so that we can ultimately help others make better sense of our dynamically changing geography. 7 things to consider, at least things that we at Hexagon consider in terms of how to communicate information about our dynamically changing Earth. First of all, I think we have to be able to connect to it. We have to be able to connect to a service that provides information, okay? And that information has to be subsequently visualized in a way that makes sense. It has to be dynamic. So it updates itself. It's got to be bi-directional. Depending on the information a farmer or an urban planner wants to know, that information or the representation and the visualization of that information has to update itself. Rather than push, I have to be able to push and pull in order to get the content and the information that is needed. It has to be interactive. There has to be a live experience associated with connecting and ultimately using that information in a way that makes a difference. It has to be portable. You have to be able to travel with it. Multi-source. We're no longer constrained with just one platform of content. We're getting it from the air, from the space, from the ground. We are sensors ourselves. It has to be multidimensional. We've done a great job moving away from 2D GISs to 3D GISs, but I think the challenge now is looking beyond 3D, looking at the time factor, looking at multiple dimensions of information that could be stacked together and mined in order to offer more value or perhaps better value. And lastly, probably the most important thing is you got to be able to communicate with this service or this ability. Okay, you got to be able to ask a question or make a query or multiple queries that allow you to make a confident decision based on your options, based on the ideal alternatives that are currently being provided. Looking at these 7 things, and perhaps there are others we can debate, Hexagon has undergone a strategy over the last 2 years since the establishment of Hexagon Geospatial of what's called a smart map. It's a play on words. We believe the map of the future is not a map. The map of the future has to be a visualized information service that helps users make sense of their dynamically changing geographies. Okay? And what's required here is the fusion of multi-source content, dynamic content that's continually being collected through the application of software delivered as a service. This is my last slide, and I just want to give you an example. Perhaps before you start the movie, I want to give you some context into this smart map or this information service. If you're from the UK and you recall, and I forget the year it was, but I was told through some folks at Milton Keynes, the city of Hull experienced tremendous flooding years ago. And as a result, a lot of the change in urban landscape from green space to urban space, the infrastructure that was there couldn't handle that 50 or 100-year storm event. So you had a lot of damage to property, to private property, to infrastructure, et cetera. So a lot of administrative counties, cities, et cetera, municipalities and government officials took stock of their changing landscapes and wanted to monitor, at least begin monitoring, changes in green space and changes in gray space so they could make informed decisions. What's important to note is you can't do away with the past. We have to use the past and map the past in order to better understand what was. We have to be able to understand what is, and most importantly, what can be and what will be. And I think Hexagon believes this is possible through the delivery and the development of these information services. So together with our partner in the UK, Sterling Geo, we put together a Hexagon Smart Map, which is a mobile or online service that allows you to visualize change about our dynamically changing geography through the fusion of different visualization techniques in order to provide the end user the ability to make a decision or take action based on the options that are available. Okay, can you hit that movie? So here we go into Milton Keynes. We have the ability to fuse satellite content from a variety of different vendors, including Digital Globe, Airbus, the Landsat archive that's now available on Amazon, we could tap into that. We look at how Yahoo Finance uses different tickers to visualize change in stock, because we're interested in visualizing change. And we have the ability to visualize that content through relative visualizations, cumulative representations, through a dynamic experience. You can look at the map, or you can just manipulate and exploit and interact with a table. The key is the visualization, but most importantly, the information and the statistics at the top through those charts. 45% of green space on 27,000 acres in 1998 reduced by 12%. So imagine, if you will, being able to dynamically connect to all these sensor feeds that are always capturing data. Digital Globe's capturing data, Airbus is capturing data, you have all these microsatellites capturing data, you have airborne vendors capturing data, you have existing government agencies capturing data. Imagine being able to connect to these sources as live dynamic feeds that pull the data, not the information, apply software to it, and ultimately deliver it as a service that can be subscribed to. It doesn't have to be a map. It could be a text message. It could be a social media feed. The form it takes is up to us to define based on the end user experience. So I believe, and we at Hexagon believe, the future is about giving form to information. And to understand the form, you have to understand the end user's dilemma and the end user's problem. That's my presentation. Thank you.